the Great British Pub, a bastion of British culture and for centuries a busy social hub that formed the beating heart of local communities. But there are some where echoes of the past linger on and the spirits served are those of the restless variety. Tonight we're raising a glass to 3 legendary locations, the Skirrid Inn, the Jamaica Inn and the 10 Bells pub in London, where the Jack the Ripper legend lives on. And if you want to know where and when you might catch a glimpse of Jack himself, keep watching until the end. For now, settle in, grab a drink and let's embark on our ghostly tour. Can a venue that's witnessed brutal, long-drawn-out executions ever thrive as a welcoming pub? Owners and the many patrons who visited the Skirrid Inn over the centuries would argue that it's more than possible, although you might want to brace for the unexpected. Nestled in the foothills of the Black Mountains, the Skirrid Inn lays claim to being the oldest pub in Wales. Archaeologists have dated the current building to the mid to late 17th century, although there are rumours of a much older inn standing on the same spot. According to local legend, this was the site of a massacre in 1175, a rallying point for Welsh rebels during late medieval times, and, later on, a courthouse with its own gallows. It's rumoured that around 180 hangings took place on the staircase of the Skirrid Mountain Inn, and the original hanging beam can still be seen, with all the grooves that the hanging rope has worn into its wood over the years. As a rule, being put to death on the gallows had the advantage of being fairly instant, as the hatch would be opened and the neck would snap. There was no hatch at Skirrid though. Instead, people were forced off the steps and allowed to suffocate slowly. Needless to say, the staircase is one of the most active areas of the inn, with many guests and members of staff reporting sightings of a tall, foreboding, shadow-like mass, which is assumed to be the malevolent spirit of the hangman. Another of the ghosts frequently spotted in the staircase area is that of John Crowther, who was the last man in Wales to be hanged for the crime of stealing sheep. Understandably disgruntled by the outcome of his trial, John's spirit never quite found peace. Perhaps the most famous and feared of all ghosts at Skirrid, though, is that of Judge George Jeffreys, the so-called hanging judge whose brutal and often biased judgments sent so many to their deaths. Many believe his spirit lingers, waiting for his next hanging victim. Visitors to the inn have reported feelings of dizziness going up the stairs, and some have even felt a terrifying choking sensation before developing inexplicable rope burns on their necks. In the downstairs pub area, the benign spirit of Father Henry Vaughan, a local clergyman, is said to roam, looking out for the building and its inhabitants. And in case that's not enough paranormal activity for you, a woman in white has also been spotted roaming the courtyard. The upstairs rooms of the Skirrid Inn are haunted by a certain Fanny Price, who is known to have worked there and died of tuberculosis sometime in the 18th century. Sightings are preceded by the smell of lavender, and guests staying in the room have reported waking to find their jewellery or dentures rearranged overnight, or else being kept awake by the sound of the toilet paper holder being spun around in a playful manner. It goes without saying that having so many ghosts in one building can prove costly. The Skirrid Inn loses around 10 to 15 glasses per week to poltergeist activity, and on a few occasions, money has flown through the air. Strange footsteps and disembodied voices are part of the fabric of the building, and there have been occasions when faces were spotted in the windows of disused floors. So does the Skirrid Inn thrive despite its dark reputation? Absolutely. Although a previous owner did find herself with quite a challenge on her hands when she decided to move on after 11 years. It would appear that the ghosts didn't want her to leave, and they increased their paranormal activity whenever a potential buyer arrived, even throwing glasses at some. For our next pub, we journey south to the bleak and windswept Bodmin Moor in Cornwall, where, precisely halfway between Launceston and Bodmin, sits the Jamaica Inn. Made famous by Daphne du Maurier's novel of the same name, the Jamaica Inn was built in 1750 as a coaching house where horses rested and weary travellers took refreshments. Its history as a haunted location, however, began in 1911 when locals and visitors began reporting an eerie figure in old-fashioned clothing who was frequently spotted sitting silently on the wall outside the inn. No matter how enthusiastically people greeted him or how hard they tried to strike up a conversation, the figure refused to even acknowledge their presence. The unsettling part? After a while, he would simply vanish into thin air. There was something else about the figure that was far more chilling though. Several people recognise him as a man who was once lured out of the pub several years previously, leaving his half-full pint behind, only to be found murdered on the moors the following day. Could this spectral apparition be his restless spirit, forever returning to quench his thirst? Whatever the reason for the appearance of Jack the Stranger as he's now known, it seemed to unleash an even greater wave of paranormal activity over the century that followed. Because cosy and convenient as the coaching house was, it was also an important location for an underworld of nefarious characters and their contraband. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, high import taxes, devastating poverty, and a quiet coastline of secret coves made Cornwall a hotbed of smuggling activity. It's estimated that half the brandy and a quarter of all tea being smuggled into the UK during that time was landed along the coasts of Cornwall and neighbouring Devon. It's these echoes of the past that appear to live on at the Jamaica Inn. Many guests report hearing the sound of horses' hooves and carriage wheels clattering over the cobblestones outside the inn, even when the courtyard is deserted. Previous managers have heard conversations uttered in a foreign tongue, which may in fact have been Old Cornish. And then there are the footsteps, heard pacing the empty hallways in the dead of night. Some have been unfortunate enough to encounter the spirit thought to be responsible, a ghostly figure of a man dressed in a tricorn hat and cloak, who's said to appear, then vanish through solid doors. Many have heard the cries of a baby at the Jamaica Inn, even when no babies are staying on the premises. This chilling echo from the past adds to the unsettling whispers of smugglers and the phantom coaches that clatter through the deserted courtyard. Is the Jamaica Inn merely a cosy pub steeped in history, or a gateway to the restless past? Those brave enough to spend a night within its ancient walls might just find the answer waiting for them, perhaps with a half-finished tankard of ale in hand. The 10 Bells pub in London's East End is another establishment with a haunting past that bleeds through to an uneasy present. Visitors have the leisure of being able to come and go, but what's it like to work at an establishment that's notorious for its creepy goings-on? In the late 1990s, live-in staff whose bedrooms were on the upper floors of the building complained of alarming encounters with a ghostly old man dressed in Victorian clothing. They would often be awoken by an uneasy feeling in the dead of night, and, turning over, would find his phantom form lying beside them on the bed. No sooner would they cry out in shock than the figure would disappear. Far from being a case of mass hysteria, even employees with no previous knowledge of this over-familiar ghost would report seeing him, with descriptions that were identical to what others had experienced. No one knew who he was, nor why he was there, until June 2005, when the pub changed hands and the new landlord decided to clear out the cellar. Hidden away in a corner, he found an old metal box. In it were the personal effects of a man named George Roberts. Further research confirmed that he had kept the pub in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and also that he was the spectral figure that staff had been encountering. Significantly, he hadn't met a happy end. Amongst his possessions was a brown leather wallet, which contained a newspaper clipping reporting his brutal murder by axe at a Swansea cinema. The ghost of George Roberts isn't the only unsettling apparition that staff at the 10 Bells have to contend with though, for the pub itself is steeped in a much darker history. During the late 1880s, during Jack the Ripper's reign of terror, the 10 Bells would have been a familiar haunt for many of his victims. Police reports state that 47-year-old Annie Chapman, one of the Ripper victims, was seen drinking there just hours before her murder. While no saint in life, Annie's ghost is now more mischievous than malevolent, blamed for broken glasses and petty pilfering from customers. Over a century later, some claim to see her spectral form sitting in the same spot, a permanent fixture where she enjoyed her final drink. Mary Kelly, the Ripper's final victim, is also said to have frequented the pub, often using the pavement outside as a pickup spot for clients, until her horrifically mutilated remains were discovered in nearby Miller's Court. But have there been any glimpses of Jack himself? Theories continue to swirl about the true identity of London's most notorious serial killer and why his bloodthirsty spree stopped so abruptly in 1888. There are some who believe that Jack threw himself from Westminster Bridge at midnight on December the 31st, and that anyone who visits the bridge on New Year's Eve might catch an eerie echo of that fateful night. If you're near the bridge when the first chimes of Big Ben ring in the new year, look eastwards. The shadowy apparition of Jack is said to appear on one of the parapets before plunging headfirst into the murky waters of the Thames, a grim reminder of one of London's most terrifying chapters.